Hi everyone, my name is Memo. This is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me and to the side of me today. So today is going to be a continuation of the plant review series for the plant that you're seeing right in front of you. So today I'm going to be talking about the Philodendron Plowmanii. Now, a bit of groundwork as always with this video. There will be chapters that I'll be adding down the bottom, so if you want to skip to your favorite bit, please do. For the people that are new, welcome. And essentially, the one thing I kind of want to make clear from the beginning of most of these review series is that these reviews are based on my experience in my conditions. So my conditions is I live in the UK, I grow most of these plants in a conservatory, so the humidity is relatively high. And yeah, just take that for what it is. Obviously, my experiences might differ from yours, but if you've got this plant and you want to add to the review, please do down below. Hopefully what I'm trying to achieve with these review series is a bit of a repository, essentially, of people's experiences growing this specific type of plant for the people that might be looking to purchase it, just so they know what to expect when they're growing this plant. And with this review series, essentially the way that the videos are structured is there's a background section, there's a speed of growth section, there is an ease of propagation, I talk about availability at the time of purchase and currently, and then also I'll talk about pests, any accessories, and wrap up with final thoughts. But let's dive into things and let's move on to the first topic. So a bit of background on this plant, and I'll keep moving it around because it is huge and it also is very, very leany. Basically, it's become very leggy in terms of the petioles, but it's because where I've got it growing, it's kind of leaning towards the light. I'll bring it in for some close-ups. As always with most of these videos now, I try to add a bit of a B-roll. You can see this is possibly one of its oldest leaf, and you can see it's kind of yellowing up to die off soon. I think this one was the next leaf, and there was a bit of a rip, unfortunately, with this one. That was the next one. The yellowing on this leaf is actually because it's getting a bit of sun bleaching, because it's getting very close to the window, but this is the newest leaf, and it's unfortunate because most of these plants that have got the silvery, so this lighter section here, I don't think it's going to come across on the video as particularly silvery, but it is silvery. And then you can also see some of the characteristics of the petiole, which is that ruffling that's happening there. But as I said, I'll give you more of a close-up on the B-roll. So let me find a good position to hold this so that my hand doesn't get completely exhausted, because it is also growing in pond. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, there is also 2 blooms that are about to come in with this plant, as well as, and hopefully that will pick up, yeah, a new growth point there as well. But yeah, so a bit of background with this one, and there is a bit of a story. I will add another video at the top there of the story of my 2 Philodendron Plowmanii. The other one at the moment I'm struggling to pick up. I will see if I can get some shots of it in for the B-roll. It's just in a really awkward position behind the camera that is just going to cause too many issues trying to get it up, basically. But background on this is, it was a plant that I was trying to find for a long period of time. I did get it on eBay. The fun story now. I can talk about it now and laugh. It wasn't as funny back then, but this came to me as it had a very small amount of roots, so it was pretty much a tiny, a kind of rooted cutting, essentially. And it had one glorious, huge leaf, probably maybe a tiny bit smaller than this one, but it had the silveriness, it had the ruffles, it had everything. I had it underneath my plant shelf on the side here. It was underneath the Anthurium vitarifolium. I don't think it's the vitarifolium that fell, but there was a plant that fell. It didn't break its terracotta pot. It didn't do anything else but it fell. However, it did fall onto the petiole of that one and only leaf and snapped it. It didn't snap it clean off, but it did snap it enough that I was sitting there going, oh, what am I going to do? And I don't know, is this going to survive? I didn't know if the roots were enough and all of these things. So I tried getting some the clear plastic wrap that you would do generally when you're grafting trees outside. And I had that because I was grafting a tree outside. And I thought, you know what, let's try. I was trying to find whether or not you can reattach a petiole, because you can reattach a stem and it will fuse if it's a clean cut and there's nothing, no bacteria or anything in it, and you kind of wrap it up tightly, it can refuse. I just didn't know if you could do that on a petiole. In my experience, it didn't work. But very soon after, I would say probably only a month and a half after, I did get a new leaf coming in through the growing media, and it did fine. It kind of started growing and it did quite well for me, basically. But that was how this came in. And the reason why I do have the second Plowmanii is because I was worried that it wasn't going to make it when it first happened. And the second Plowmanii annoyingly came up for sale, which was half the price of what I paid for this. So I ended up getting 2 Plowmanias. Quite glad I did, actually, because the second Plowmanii did do a lot better, but it didn't have most of this silveriness. The eBay seller was very clear with me, and or actually with their listing, and kind of saying that it had some pest damage in the past and it's been dealt with. I've never had any pests with that one, so that was completely true of that seller. But I think the leaf was very, very, very mature, or it came from a very mature section of the plant, so it had lost most of its silveriness. It was still there, and actually even the new leaves that have come in on that plant have never been particularly silvery. This one really hasn't lost much of its silveriness, which is awesome. But yeah, I think that's enough I wanted to talk about. I think that was pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about for background. Let's move on to the next topic. So looking at the speed of growth for this plant, and this is an interesting one because it is, I don't know if you might be able to notice, it is a crawler, so it will crawl along the surface. I've got it in pond, by the way, for those that are eagle-eyed amongst yourself, and I've got a tiny bit of a moss collar at the top of it. But essentially, with this plant, it's an interesting one because I've had both and I can kind of compare them now. It's not the fastest philodendron, I will say. It's not even particularly fast as a houseplant. It's not slow, it's kind of average, I would say. So if I was to benchmark this against my other kind of big crawler, which is my Philodendron gloriosum, this is definitely slower. But let's do the usual benchmark that I do for a golden pothos in my space. If it will grow 2 to 3 leaves in the summer, maybe 1 in the winter, this will bring out maybe a leaf a month, maybe a month and a half in the summer. In the winter, it might be a new leaf every 2 months, maybe 3. It does really slow down quite a bit in the winter, but I've also got a relatively mature specimen, I think, here with really, really large leaves. So that would kind of make sense. My second Plowmanii, which had a bit of an issue at some point, and the leaves went smaller. They're now starting to size up again, mainly because it really didn't like the transition from soil into pond. But when the leaves are a bit smaller, you tend to get them a bit more, they tend to grow a bit faster. But yeah, generally speaking, a bit of an average speed of growth for this one for a philodendron. Average towards slow for an average houseplant, basically. But yeah, still a kind of stable, good grower, essentially. Moving on to ease of propagation with this one, very similar to a lot of other crawlers, for instance, the Philodendron pasterzanum and the gloriosum as well. This is relatively easy to propagate because of the crawling nature of it, especially if it goes over a pot. You can easily kind of essentially air layer this plant, which is just wrapping some damp sphagnum moss and getting some cling film around that kind of growing stem. It will then root out at the node and will bring out kind of roots essentially that will then start growing to the sphagnum moss and then cut it off. That's generally how I'd like to propagate most of my crawlers, and that's generally the way that I've had the best success. But, and as always, obviously, with any kind of crawler, when you do that, you kind of interrupt that apical dominance. And then what you can then start seeing is branching. So you'll get an even bushier plant. And I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people always get a bit surprised with quite how small the pot is in comparison to the plants that I'm growing. But I've said this before and I'll say it again. I tend to find that that works better for the plants, because essentially you should be potting plants up. The size of the pot should be based on the root size, not on what you can actually see of the plant, so the stems and the petioles and the leaves. And you also get situations where you will get blooms as well. And that is something that I found with a lot of plants, not going out of your way to keep them root bound, but when they're a bit more root bound, and this is especially important for plants that you want to bloom, they will bloom more readily basically. And normally I would cut off the blooms, but I'm just curious to see what the blooms are going to look like for the Passasanum ones. After this, I'll probably just cut them off if they ever reappear basically, because I want the energy going into new foliage. But yeah, in terms of the propagation, it was relatively straightforward. As I said, I've done it through air layering. I would imagine as well that this would probably take quite nicely to being propagated directly into pon. I've not tried that, but if you have, do leave a comment down below. Potentially in water as well, but I would imagine you would probably need to let the cut stem callus over. And I mean, you would do that with most of your propagations. Obviously, slightly different when it comes to air layering. But yeah, this is, in terms of propagating speed, I'd say kind of, again, it's average. It's similar to when it's growing in the pot, basically, where you will see this plant kind of take its time a bit sometimes, but that's fine. You just kind of let it do its thing and it will kind of get there. It's not going to be something that's going to root out exceptionally fast, but not even that slow, if that makes sense. But yeah, let's move on to the next topic. Moving on to the topic of availability, and I've moved the plant to the other side because I am cramping on the hand that I was holding it, because through the whole video I am holding this plant, and apologies if it's a bit shaky, but as I said, pon, it's heavy. The availability with this one, when I got it, which I'll put the kind of time frame that I've had this on the video, I think it's either been a year and a half, so not a plant that I've had for quite as long as I've had some of my other plants. But I've had it for long enough now, and because I've had the two different ones, I can talk a bit more comfortably on kind of general trends that I've seen with this plant. But availability wise, when I first got this back then, I did say I got both of them on eBay. They were relatively available. The price that I was seeing for some of them, if you were getting a slightly bigger, fuller plant, you're looking at kind of low towards kind of middle low triple digits. I don't think that has massively changed at the moment. And again, this is based on the time frame when this video is being filmed and in the UK essentially, which is where I'm looking for. It might be different where you are. And yeah, so the price hasn't fluctuated too much. I don't know if that's because there's not that many people that are necessarily looking for this plant. There might not be that many people looking for this plant. Also, the nature of its speed when it grows, that it's maybe not the fastest one out there, could have something to do with this as well. But definitely there isn't a flood of it in the market. You can find it if you're looking for it. You probably wouldn't find this out, I wouldn't think, in a regular plant store. Maybe I think, I'm trying to think now, maybe I've seen it at one or two online plant stores recently. But yeah, so you would maybe see this in very, very specialty plant stores, but it's mainly going to be online, and it's probably going to be private sellers unless you decide to buy it from Far East or South America, basically. But nonetheless, and I would imagine this would ship quite nicely as well. It did. Both of mine shipped relatively fine, and there wasn't much stress to them as well. Granted, I did get them when it was slightly warmer. But yeah, availability wise, I think it stayed the same. Pricing wise, I've seen the prices maybe dip down a tiny bit from what I was mentioning, kind of those I think the cheapest one that I got, which was the second one, again, I'm pointing behind the camera because that's where it is, was maybe very, very high double digits. This one was definitely low triple digits, but as I said, it was both of those were single leaf rooted cuttings. I think you might be able to find them for slightly cheaper if they're unrooted, basically. But yeah, I mean, it's a relatively available plant in terms of the slightly harder ones to find. It's not something, for instance, like currently, I think is it the Whipple Way, which is very, very difficult to find. It's nowhere near as difficult to find as something like a Spiritus Sancti. It's nowhere near as expensive as that either. But probably less prevalent and less available that you might see gloriosums, because at least at the moment in the UK and Europe, you're seeing more gloriosums coming onto the market, both from private sellers and also because I think there was an influx that came in from some of the Dutch nurseries. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, relatively, if you search hard enough and you're willing to spend a bit of money, you should be able to get this basically. Pests with this one. And again, I'll talk about the usual pests that I'm dealing with, and I think that's just because I'm dealing with it as well. This is one that the mealybugs in this space tend to gravitate towards. It's got loads of nooks and crannies. It's got those ruffled petioles. There's a lot of places for them to hide as well. I don't think I've ever had spider mites on this plant specifically. And I'm trying to think now, yes, on occasion, because I'm getting some whitefly occasionally in here as well. Because of the size of these leaves, whitefly is attracted to it. Mealybugs is the one thing that I will keep struggling to kind of get off this as well, but it never goes fully crazy with this plant, so it is manageable. But as you can see, some of the damage here isn't from the pest necessarily, it is mainly from the kind of sun damage, because it is sitting, for the people that have seen my conservatory tour, I was able to recently put some shade cloths up, but before I put the shade cloth on, we've got some really, really, really sunny days, and it's really close to that kind of window basically, and it was getting pretty direct light for large chunks of the day. So the fact that it only kind of had a tiny bit of burn, it's okay basically. Right, moving on to accessories with this one, and I would say you're not going to need a support stick. I have got a support stick on this because I actually tie this support stick to the actual metal shelf because it's so forward heavy now and because it's as long and leggy kind of petioles. I don't think this is necessarily a trait of this plant. It's just because of where I'm growing it. That it will tend to tip over, so I've got that there. But yeah, there's nothing really bespoke that you will need with this. If you've grown other crawlers like a Pastazanum, like a Dean McDowell, like a Gloriosum, all of those plants are going to be very similar to this one. So as long as you're getting, actually that's probably one accessory that you would need, is you probably need a longer kind of pot really, because you want it to crawl as much as possible. I haven't given this much of a pot, and you can already see that it's starting to drip off. If I bring this in, you can see that it's starting to drip off the side of the pot there. So yeah, that's probably going to be the big one. Yeah, and then maybe some sphagnum moss if you wanted to like do the air layering method that I was talking about. But other than that, it's a pretty straightforward plant really, and it's almost as easy to grow as a crawler as the Gloriosum is. So if anybody who's got a Gloriosum and knows that they can be quite easy, this is very similar. So moving on to final thoughts, and I'll move this again to my other arm because my other arm is now tired. Let's do the usual thing that I will do with most of these videos where I'll say, if I didn't own this and I had a chance to purchase it, knowing what I know now, would I buy it? Yes, I probably would. It's not a definite yes, but it's yes, I would. I don't know whether or not I would want to start off with a slightly more juvenile plant and then slowly mature it in my space. But yeah, I definitely would. I mean, it's not been a particularly difficult plant. If anything, it's been a relatively hardy plant. I might offend a few people by saying this. I think I prefer this foliage to my Gloriosum. My Gloriosum is easier, so it will always have a very fond space in my heart for that reason. but I think I prefer this foliage. To me, it's a lot more striking. It's less fussy because it's not velvety. But yeah, I think, I mean, just. I'm a sucker for a bit of silver, basically. It's fine. But the next thing that I usually benchmark it on is if I say from 0 being the worst in terms of a score to 10 being the best, what score would I give this? I would probably give this a strong 7, I would say. I wouldn't even say 7 to an 8. I'd give this a strong 7, just purely because of a few niggles here and there. Would I like it to be a bit faster? Yes. Can it get leggy? Yes. And it did take a beat to get used to pond, which a lot of my other philodendrons don't. So that's another thing on this one as well. But yeah, overall, it's a solid plant. So if you're thinking about getting it, my suggestion would be definitely go try it. Basically, give it a try. I don't think it's a plant that's necessarily going to disappoint. It might also be one that surprises you. I think from a lot of people that I've spoken to when they first got this, they were just like, maybe, I don't know, is it for me, is it for not? But I think the majority of people that have had it since then, of kind of eventually getting it, they were just like, actually, no, really, really quite enjoy this plant. So it might surprise you, basically. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say about this. Relatively, I like these types of reviews for these plants that are relatively straightforward because I can be kind of very honest, show you the warts and all, but still it's a very, very solid plant that's a kind of decent grower as well. But yeah, tell me about your experiences if you've got this plant. Drop me a comment down below. And yeah, as always, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.